Welcome and thank you for joining. This interview is part of a research article titled Ethical Risk of Generative AI in Education by Or Daniel and the advisor Dr. Rinat Rosenberg-Kima from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. The availability of the interview along with the scientific article can benefit both the scientific and education communities. The interview content was not edited, only noise and pauses were removed. We thank all subject matter experts for contributing their knowledge and experience to this study. A link to the article and ways to contact us will be added to the information of this interview. Interview number 11 with Dr. Gregorio Ameyugo, held on December 4th, 2023 in English. Enjoy. So please state your name and what is your professional background and experience.
Okay. My name...
And thank you. Of course, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. My name is Gregorio Ameyugo, and I am the head of one of the divisions at CEA, which is the French Atomic Energy Commission, which is a research and technology organization. And my division has got some 300 researchers in the fields of artificial intelligence, both image, video, and natural language processing, as well as robotics with collaborative robotics, human-machine interfaces, including psychoergonomics of HMI, virtual reality, and interactive simulation, and network protocols. So it's all digital technologies, and the division is focused on the interaction between humans and digital technologies and the physical world. So it's making systems that can adapt better to the physical world and adapt better to humans, and building on how easy it will be to deploy them, how efficient they will be, and how to safeguard either cognitive capabilities or emotional aspects for humans that have to interact with technology. So that's my position, and I have been in charge of this division since January 2020. And before that, I was the head of European programs for the same institute. So that's the Digital Technologies Institute at CEA. Before that, I was in charge of industry partnerships. So it's looking at industrial problems that we can solve with these technologies. And before that, I was in industry, namely at Airbus Helicopters, Indra, which is a defense company, and also Rolls-Royce, so the aero engine maker. And my academic background is a doctorate, so I'm an engineering doctor in aerospace engineering. And I carried out PhD level research in artificial intelligence, mainly for gas turbine diagnostics. And it was both in fuzzy logic and genetic algorithms and neural networks. And the interesting thing is that I had to switch subjects after 1 year because they realized that the technology worked, but it was not certifiable for aviation purposes at the time. And if you go back beyond that, I coded my first neural network when I was aged 16. So that was a perceptron for image processing. So I have been in touch with artificial intelligence, you could say, since probably since the year 1997, 1998, more or less.
Wow.
Before we had the capabilities that we have today. So that's that's my background. I also have publications and patents in the field of artificial intelligence as well. The latest one is robots that dream. That's
Wow. Okay. So that's amazing, and it's a great honor that you participate in an interview to my research. I'm really honored. So, in your view, what are the potential benefits or advantages of using generative AI technologies in education?
very well. So perhaps just before getting into the benefits, I would like to make a distinction between generative AI by itself and ChatGPT. So if ChatGPT is the most visible example of generative AI that we have today, there are literally now dozens, not dozens, yeah, there are dozens of foundation models that not only cover text and image, but also begin to cover other areas. So I would say first, I will talk a lot about text, large language models, but it's not just image generation. We also have generative AI to create things like computer code, so software code, and increasingly, and this is also going to open up interesting possibilities, even the generation of 3D content. So it's, I would say, if we focus on generative AI as what is making the buzz today, I would say, generative AI, then we are focusing on the software and systems that are coming out today that are based on very, very large amounts of data. That have generative capabilities, so that can create new things that look very much like something a human would produce. And I will focus mainly on that. If we went back 3 or 4 years before the big disruption that we're having today, there was already generative AI, but the uses were limited. So, for example, having super zoom in pictures and things like that, it's using generative adversarial networks. That's already generative AI. But what will interest us from an educational point of view is really the large language models and the foundation models that can create vast amounts of content with a few inputs. So if we look at that, then we say what are the potential benefits or advantages? There are quite a few, and I would say the one that I find the most exciting in terms of benefits is the possibility of using this technology, for example, by means of a chatbot, as you could use with ChatGPT, but it could also be integrated in the background of educational applications to adapt the content, to adapt the pace at which knowledge is being delivered to the specific needs of the student. And I would say that is what I find the most exciting in terms of possibilities, because this is something that a human does naturally when it teaches another human, at least if it's a good teacher. And that is something that is already artificially achieved, for example, through online courses, when there is a continuous evaluation of how well you are doing in a course to promote one content or the other. I would say an example that comes to mind is Duolingo, which is not yet using generative AI, but I think they will be very soon if they know what they're doing. But the interesting thing is that it could be done much more seamlessly, because these large language models are simply using language statistics to adapt, and it could be done instantly. So it means that through a fluid interaction, as you would have with a person, that you could have a message that is continuously adapted to you so that you understand it. So, for example, some tests that I think I did at the beginning of the year was trying to explain tensorial artificial intelligence, and which is difficult to understand even for the people who are working in it. And I asked them to explain it to a 12-year-old, and then to a 7-year-old, and even to a 2-year-old, and they managed to get a metaphor with toys and things like that. That was quite acceptable. So I think that would be the most powerful positive benefits of generative AI that I can see right now for education. So specifically for education, if you do something, so a benefit that is for education, but for many other things, I would say it's productivity, and it's the possibility to generate very quickly large amounts of text or text and images. So it's generating content, and this is something that is beginning to be used in the workplace right now, and something that could be used for education. But I think we will debate this more in the risks side than in the benefits. What I can see is that already there are students of every age that are using it, and uh, and they are using it to get very quickly information on a topic without having to search through the internet. So I would say it's the speed at which one can have access to exactly the type of information that one expected, and this could be, if it is well managed and if the risks are managed, a powerful tool for education, where lots of time has always been lost looking for information sources, specifically gleaning through useless information that finally wasn't necessary in order to find one or two key learnings. So in that sense, and I would say it's almost part of the same thing, it's the ability of generative AI to summarize as well. So summarize content, and which it can do very well, and it can be used very quickly to get the essential points out of very long tests. So there is one that I am less sure about, and that is being able to test one's own propositions. For example, if there is a test in the classroom, or there is an essay or something that has to be done, and the student thinks that this approach or that approach is the right one, then generative AI is also very good for testing that. So say, can you criticize what I am saying? Does this make sense? And it can do that very well, because finally what we have is models that are able to tell you the things that go well with the inputs that you're giving. So whether it sounds good or not, that's something that it can already do. So I would, I think we can. I'm probably missed things, but those are the benefits that come to mind relative to the technology we have today. The problem, of course, is that the technology is evolving so fast, and there are so many promises being made that whatever we might have tomorrow, it's it might be it might put this into question. From what I am seeing, what will come tomorrow in terms of future AI models, or things that are meant to come out as early as next year, they will still keep all these benefits. And what they will do is probably get rid of some of the risks and challenges that we have today.
We can hope. So if we mention a little bit of the risk, and you try to go around it to wait for the next question. So here it comes. So what do you see as the main risk, right? Challenges or ethical concerns associated with educational uses of generative AI?
Okay, there are quite a few risks actually involved. So I will try to be synthetic and also a bit orderly. One risk that is probably not the biggest risk today, but we are seeing it deployed, is in terms of sources and copyright, in the fact that the models that are being put out today very often include information that comes from, for example, from books written by professors and things like that. But because it has been gleaned down into numbers inside a matrix, it's difficult to pinpoint. And I saw an interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is this famous astronomer, who's Carl Sagan's successor, and they asked him specifically, "What do you think about the fact that ChatGPT has got the contents of probably all of your books inside?" And he said, well, I'm not very happy about it. I mean, I like people to have access to my knowledge, but then this creates a risk that in terms of the effort that people will put into creating knowledge, if they know that there is some big model that's going to just vacuum clean everything, and that it will be difficult to trace the copyright, because one of the things that these large models are making is erase the sources. Everything gets distilled down to just 2 bytes per parameter, a few billion parameters, and it's impossible to trace it back. And if you say that it's saying the same things you say in your book, say yes, but it's never quite the exact same thing. So it creates questions even related to how content is generated, even educational content is generated. Another one of the things that is much more worrying in the fact that it's also related to sources, because sources disappear. There is a big risk for students, and even if you go into higher education and research, the risk gets worse. I mean, some authors are talking about a big epistemological breakdown in the way that science is practiced, and that is that throughout humanity we have always had to go look for sources, and because we have had to go look for the sources of information, that has opened the possibility of having trusted sources and not trusted sources. And it's even journalism works the same way. If you just hear information, if you just see information given to you by a large model or a large piece of software that is supposed to be an oracle, and there is no way to get the sources, because today there is no way to get the sources with any of the big models. There are smaller hybrid applications that try to do that. Then you will begin to lose even the faculty of critical thinking and questioning things. So I think that the risks for education, if we think of education as more than just putting content into your brain, but also teaching you the way in which you should acquire new content into your brain and the way in which you should think and act, then that is a big risk, and that is a big risk regarding the habits of students, and that's something that should be taken into account. A further risk, I think it's more in the long term. It's the tunnel effect. So it's the tunnel effect that you can have with these large models relative to how they are trained. So if you synthesize, and of course this has been put forward as a theory, but I think it's quite a likely one. If more and more content on the internet is generated with this, and I say on the internet, but there are people who are selling books that are supposed to be educational books that have been generated completely with ChatGPT or a similar tool. But if more and more of these tools, of this knowledge base, is comes from the model that produced it, and it's used to feed the model back, then we are augmenting the exergy, so the negative or the useless energy in the system. We will still have more and more data, but it's based on less and less knowledge behind. So I would say that is a risk insofar as you can look into the future and think, what if everybody begins using this, and there are no other ways in which knowledge is acquired and delivered. So I say that feedback loop is also a risky thing. Another one of the I would say risks, it's also tied to it, is that these models are already being used today to correct spelling and grammar and things like that. You could say Microsoft Word already did this, so this is not a specific risk to generative AI. But I have been completely unable to make ChatGPT produce spelling mistakes. So I asked them to write a text like a French 12-year-old, and most French 12-year-olds today, unfortunately, they have horrible spelling. And it can't. So it will reproduce the register, the type of language, but it just cannot make mistakes. So one of the further risks, and here I think we're already getting into cognitive problems, is producing, you could say it's a cognitive or an intellectual laziness, in the way that we've already had with arithmetic ever since we have calculators. Now we're not talking about a calculator, we are talking about something that can produce seemingly coherent thought in our place. And then you can say, well, it's the misuse. Yes, but what's going on already is that many people are using it to substitute parts of the thought process instead of using these tools to fine tune or restructure, make things better. They're being used to generate the content in itself without any input from the author. And I would say that's also a risk. And then if you think about an operational risk for education, we see it already. And it's just that from the use of these tools, educators today, there are some that haven't caught up. There are quite a few that haven't caught up yet. They might think that their student performance is going up when in reality everyone is using these tools without them knowing. So there are things that have to be revisited because of these tools. I don't think I have covered all the risks. One of them might come back later. I'm not sure, but I see a lot of them actually.
So the next one is what recommendation would you have for policymakers regarding regulating or providing guidance on generative AI in education?
That's a more difficult one. Because a policymaker is supposed to have an impact. So it's education wise. So it's someone who does policy for the education at whichever level. And the difficulty, I would think that the biggest difficulty today relative to policy making for education is simply the speed at which the tools themselves are changing. And if you attempt to regulate a field that is changing very fast, then there is a danger that the regulation or whatever policies are implemented, they will come too late and they will be obsolete already. This is a huge problem today, I would say, because even in AI in general, you've got this East-West divide. You have Europe trying to regulate with the AI Act in general, so we're not even talking about education. And you have China especially, but also the United States saying you are stopping too early to regulate and you're going to miss the train and you will not be able to adopt these technologies. Whereas if you don't regulate at the beginning and you allow people to use these technologies freely, then you will be able to capitalize on the benefits. Then you can check what works and what doesn't. And you will not have missed out. So I will give you my personal opinion, and it will be a very European opinion, I'm afraid. And that is to say that there needs to be regulation. Now, what I am less sure of is whether this policy should be a forbidding policy, so like you should only use it in these areas, um, or rather a positive policy. These are some areas where it can be used already in these ways. I would of course tend to do the second one rather than just having a blanket. But I think that education should not be the area where we deploy this the fastest. I think that it should be more recent than in other areas, and I will try to explain why. One of the things that we do not understand well yet are the psychological effects of using it. It's the things that I was talking about now. Whether it's intellectual laziness or whether it's the developing of beliefs, I would say even. So that the way to carry out your everyday human business is to have an oracle that you can just trust with whatever they tell you. So I would say that if you look at the panorama today in generative AI, it's already easy to see where it can make a difference today and it can be relatively safe, and where it's definitely not safe. And I would say the definitely not safe side, the one there is no question about, is the fact that these models are by definition not accurate. They are not meant to be accurate. So if you're looking for facts, they will never be a good place to look for facts, not the ones we have today. So if things change next year, as Jan LeCun and now Sam Altman are implying that they might, with Q-Star and whatever model Meta is working on for next year, then that's a different matter. So I will focus on what technology is already available today. And this technology, if you ask this technology to give you sources, it will give you all the sources that you want. And they will all be made up, unless you are very lucky, so by chance. So I'd say that it's in itself is already a strong indicator of where where the limit should be put on an education, from an educational point of view. So I would say that in terms of policy, and I think that there are several things. One of them is, and I think it would be hugely useful, is to include AI education. So it's education on generative AI and what it can do and what its limits are, first for educators, and to do that very quickly so that the educators can include this type of information and educate even students, even the younger ones, if necessary, relative to the advantages and risks of this technology. So I would say this is not using generative AI to educate, but it's educating people about generative AI. And I would say this is the very first thing. And if the educators themselves are not, they are not educated about generative AI, then short of forbidding it, there will be lots of big mistakes made in its deployment. I would say that's the very first thing. Then, in terms of uses, I've already begun to see uses propping up. For example, in art classes and things like that. So I already see in places, in areas where you do not need accuracy. And you don't need accuracy of facts and numbers and this sort of thing. There are already creative ways in which teachers are introducing students in many places to generative AI. So it's just to give you a quick example, it's generates a dream, an image of a dream that you have had with generative AI. So it's something that can help students reflect on things, and that can already allow them to get used to this technology. And for one thing in particular, which I think it's the biggest benefit of generative AI, when I use generative AI, and I do it a lot, I have the feeling that I have got an army at my disposal. So a little team of people, and I use it a lot for my work, especially when I have to communicate in public and generate. And people have asked me even in the past week, it's like you've got a communications team that helps you do your presentations. And that's the beauty of it. So it's improving productivity. I think that's the main, and that is why we cannot regulate it blindly. Say, well, the policy should be no generative AI at all, because we see that the productivity improvement with just the tools that we have is huge. Even if you look at the Boston Consulting Group study from a couple of months ago, they say it's 17% improvement in cognitive tasks for the top performers, and 43% improvement for the lazy ones. This is how I read it. And the lazy ones become better than the good ones before both of them deployed generative AI. So you say, wow, this is, it's a, you could say this is a triumph of the week. The way that I see it is that generative AI can have a positive effect on bottom performers. So a follow-on reflection from that, and this is something that's also very close to heart, as it's for children with dyslexia, with attention deficit disorder, with lots of problems that unfortunately, you can debate whether they are caused by digital technologies to begin with, because that's possible. But you could say that this is a full-blown epidemic, full-blown mental epidemic in the younger generations. They can actually perform very close to people who are not affected by these disorders if they have the crutch that is a generative AI tool that will help them develop their thoughts faster, and whereas normally they cannot keep their concentration for the time that it would take them to do it just by themselves. So if you think of the power of generative AI in the future as a similar power to the one that we have with electrical appliances, the one that we all have by using our calculators, and we can do wonderful calculations that humans couldn't before. Of course, you take the calculator away, and we are stupid compared to people 100 years ago. But it's the couple that are being made more powerful. Then using this type of thing is something that should be taught. How to use it, how to use generative AI to produce, but it should never be taught how to manage a team, even a generative AI team, before you have learned what it is that they will be doing, which means that you should not use generative AI to generate content if you have not already been trained to generate content yourself. I think this is maybe a critical thing. So I think that the use of generative AI tools could be included into curricula.
Okay,
Uh,
just stop you here, Greg, and incorporate what you're starting to say with the next question that is exactly going. Yeah, yeah. So we start with the policymakers, and you went to the level of the educators and administrators, right? What suggestions would you have for them, for educators that are looking to integrate AI into curricula and institutions? So that means now you can, that's what you're saying. So if they want to put it into curricula, yeah, sorry.
yes, you're You are correct, or even though I think that policymakers should also listen to what can happen in the on the ground to make their policies. But absolutely. So administrators, in terms of people who are going to administer educational programs, is this the question? That's right. So it's the incorporation of. So I would say that three things. What we said at the beginning. So it's raising awareness and teaching how to use generative AI in general, the same way that you use maths or basic maths in general. So that's something that can be done. I would say even relatively early. But it can be done at any level. And the second thing is. Content generation and other uses, but they should always come after people have already been trained in doing these things manually, of having their own critical thoughts. And so I would say it's awareness from very early on in whichever course, in whichever discipline, and then developing the skills to do things oneself, and then taking generative AI as a team of of magical dwarfs that will be working for you, then you can learn to manage those magical dwarfs, and you can generate content knowing what its limitations are, and also having having created the thought structures and processes that you need in your brain before, so that you will not miss out on that, because I think that ties into the risks. And unfortunately, I would say the risks, they're still not well understood. So that's why it calls for whatever is done, do not do it instead of, but as well as the education that you're already providing in language, in science as well. You can see the impact in many areas.
Thank you. That's a great answer. So let's continue to the next one. We don't have a lot more. Don't worry about it. Under what circumstances is the use of generative AI in educational setting is appropriate and ethical acceptable, and when it would be inappropriate or unethical?
Okay, bearing in mind that this is changing, this is changing all the time. Well, at least the appropriate side, because I think ethics at a high level, they can be defined. I would say that today, for example, there is a question regarding ethics of students that are using generative AI to generate assignments, and of course, it ceases to become an ethical problem when the teacher tells the students that he expects them to make use of generative AI to generate it. And but then, of course, the educators have to evaluate for something else other than the amount of content, or even the structure, which will be very similar per student. So I would say that the appropriateness of the use of generative AI in education can be much wider than what the public fears are today. It just depends on what we are testing for. So I would say the use of generative AI, because you're saying in educational settings, of course, and there are two sides. One of them is the use of generative AI to educate, and the use of generative AI by the students in the process of generating content. And I would say that the use of generative AI to educate, for example, going back to what we said at the beginning, to providing specific learning paths that can evolve continuously, I think that there are fewer. I would say that there are fewer ethical questions regarding that than regarding the methods that are used today. I'll explain. If you're using an LLM that is adapting its level to you, it's doing so statistically, and you have the possibility of receiving that content without anybody knowing what the LLM was doing, because it's all statistical. The mechanisms that exist today, if you have to drop down one level in order for the student to understand, then people will know that you have dropped down one level. So it's adapting, but you know that you're adapting upwards or downwards. Whereas because of the construction of these large models, the adaptation can take place without any trace of it, unless you record it on purpose afterwards. But so you can have this adaptation more fluidly. So I would say this is even a potential ethical benefit in terms of adaptation without monitoring necessarily the worth of someone. But other than that, most of the questions that I see arising from generative AI in education are relative to the answering of questions and producing the proof that the students have learned something, and that's where the questions are. So if you are testing for facts and content, then if your objective is that the students keep these facts in mind, it's not a good idea to use generative AI, and many people have already gotten caught because most of the time the facts are wrong. So when you you get the wrong facts, it's easy to know. In terms of thought processes, and I would say even ethical and moral education itself. That's something that I have a big question about, because the way that the most of the generative AI models have been built so far, they have ethics built into them by humans already. You could say it's a specific type of ethics, or you could say it's either left leaning or well, but right now the content that these tools provide, it has already been given an ethical slant. So if you are teaching ethics or morals to students and you want to know what they think and they use this type of tool, you will never know what they think. You will only hear what the orthodoxy thinks. If we look at models that are coming up like Grok, that's the model that's being built by X, and I think it's already been released in the United States, it will do just the opposite, and there is no filter at all. So I would say that the questions regarding generating content are important relative to what you want to be testing for. I would say that there is no question regarding the ethics of using it as part of the creative process of generating the answers, but then only in settings where they want to see the complete piece. Like, for example, I want you to write an essay or a short book or something like that. Not when you are checking which facts have stuck in the student's brain. Which is a big question. So I know that I am getting into dangerous territory, because people are beginning to say that that humans should not be educated the same way anymore. That we should have a lot less emphasis on facts and knowledge inside our brains, and that we should really become adept at manipulating knowledge that is outside our brains faster and more efficiently than we do today. And this is something I keep hearing all around me. This is not something you hear, of course, from psychiatrists or psychologists who are worried about this this proposal. But maybe what I am giving to you as an answer is also colored by this question behind. Like, should the fact that we have these tools that facilitate the access to knowledge even more, should this change the way which we consider education itself as an activity? Should we think of humans not as animals that can store information and dream about the future, but as animals that can interact with something that they have built that can create dreams, as they can, because we can create dreams with these tools already, and that can process the information and can store the information from them. And my personal take on it is that that would be a very dangerous path to go down. I know that there are other paths in the long term, even transhumanistic, that say we should not fear that because we will be plugged into these systems constantly. I do not see that yet. And I, for one, think that the human experience is much more enhanced when you have things between your two ears that you do not need to ask ChatGPT to give you.
Thank you for that answer. Also, a lot of philosophical questions we need to consider.
You can take them out of the interview if you want. That's when I begin to go too far.
No. That's amazing, and I think we should consider that question, of course. Investigate about or research about it. That will be more difficult, but we should consider these questions. So the next one, you said a lot of risk actually in this talk. Even some of the benefits, when you think about it, some of them can can hold some risk inside the benefit itself. So in your opinion, how should educators and policymakers assess the risk associated with generative AI? But what this question is different between the others, because let's say you want some kind of a test, right, before entering an AI tool, right, or an AI system to education systems. How could we know if that tool has risk or not, or what are the tests or the question we should ask?
That's a very good question, and I guess it depends on the type of tool because there are different types of tools based on generative AI already. So let's imagine that we are talking about a tool that is going to educate people. So the tool is has been created, for example, as a chatbot teacher in a particular discipline. So so if you interact with this tool every day, you will learn, and the tool, I would say, just to finish characterizing it, it's very likely that this tool would remember things that the student has told them, even personal anecdotes of their life, and be able to take them out again by generating when generating content. So I would say that if we look at the risks, the I would say that the psychological risks today, it's too early. I hope I'm wrong and that someone is moving fast regarding that. But I would say that educators and policymakers do not still have enough to work on relative to how to assess the psychological risk, which do not only depend on the content generation side, but even the human machine interface that you use and the speed or the support. So let's put those aside. I would say that one of them is in terms of the accuracy of what it will be given. So I would say that the I don't think this exists yet. So it's been used a lot by researchers. We're doing lots and lots of benchmarks. They exist. So the accuracy um, of large language models, for example, one very popular benchmark is called human eval. So right now you've got this human eval. It's if you want to test the accuracy of a large language model, you download the human eval dataset, and it asks questions to the LLM, and it checks the answer. So these things exist already. I would say in general terms. However, I would say that the measures that are used today to evaluate the performance of these LLMs, they are not appropriate yet for their use in education. Just as an example, and I might have the figures wrong, but it's the right ballpark. In human eval, if you ask 150 questions to the 150 questions to the large language model, and it gives you 140 wrong answers and 10 right answers, it still counts as right. So this, in terms of different uses, it might be okay. Well, it gives you the right answer from time to time. Depending on the educational use, you might need different measures. I have seen other evaluations that conclude that ChatGPT gives the right answer about 50% of the time. So this is still something that's not useful. I would say that, and I hope that this will come also very soon with the industry, is that when you provide a tool, you also try to conform, for example, to an educational program, and you use that. So you say, well, because the way that these tools work is with Q&A, so you put context into the large language model, and it gives you back whatever text it thinks should go with it. Then you could have evaluations, so the list of the key concepts that need to be retained, and you basically test it. You make the model do a test, and if you cannot do a test, it will be very difficult to assess its accuracy, which I think is one of the most critical questions if you're going to use generative AI for educational purposes today. So the tests exist. If specific tests for a specific application do not exist, then someone has to develop them. And I'm hoping that the companies that want to sell them, I know you cannot be the judge and the executioner, but I think in this instance, it's perfectly acceptable to say, well, what are the things that you need to teach? It's this key concept and this one and this one and this one, and this is the things that it should be telling you. Put it to the test. So you can do this very easily. So I would say the accuracy is something that's important. One thing that we have not talked about in the interview yet is the security aspect of these tools, because once you begin giving it context, this context is stored. Depending on the model, it's not always stored in the same place, but you could have the model recall the personal information that you have given it. So I would say that a consideration today as well would be, how are these models run? Where is the information from the students stored? Would you run them? You can run these already in computers, not necessarily on a server, but it takes for most large language models about a minute to answer. So I have a feeling that all of the educational applications that will be deployed in the coming months, at least, and probably in the next couple of years, they will be running off a server. For large educational institutions, you can imagine that they could be run onto a local server farm or a cluster, something like that. For most educational institutions, they probably will have to go with models that are being run at cloud providers or servers provided by the people who are providing the application. So then data security, how will things be mixed between students become important. And if a student shares personal things, then another student might get the personal things that the first student shared. So I would say that the cybersecurity side of things should be looked into, and most educators are not prepared.
Mhm. So that's really important. And you actually also went, so you said security. So it's another perspective. So let's go to the final question, because you started it already with the security aspect. So any other perspective you would like to share regarding ethics of generative AI in education, like you said about security, about privacy?
Mm-hmm. So security and privacy, they are both aspects that are linked to ethics, for sure. And I would say that these are not fatal problems with generative AI, but the way that generative AI is emerging, they are considerations that can affect the ethics of deploying a tool or not. So where these models are run, and how do they store personal information, and what type of information can they then regurgitate to someone else. And I think that there are problems that can be solved today. I would say it's in the last few months it's been too early for anyone to consider them solving them, because we were still in the middle of the gold rush with all the tools coming out. But I think that these are considerations that have to be there from the start, and that's probably where the I would say policy making and regulation can be put forward fastest, because there is no question about what information should leave one place to go to the other. And say, well, can the technology allow privacy? The answer is yes. Do all architectures provide that privacy? No. So many of them do not. Hence the success of Microsoft with Copilot, whereas companies are more wary to deploy other more open tools. So the same should apply to education. I'm not sure whether I have other angles on ethics that I haven't covered yet.
That's fine. That's fine. So thank
No
you. The
problem,
last
Matt.
question actually is a formal question. Do you approve of publishing this audio recording, publicly for everyone and make it accessible for everyone?
I approve it, yes.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate the time,
Thank you.
and your answers were amazing. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.